Amara had survived 3 years on Obsidian Reach by following one simple rule. Mind your own business, and maybe, just maybe, the universe would return the favor. Spoiler alert, the universe had other plans. The station itself was a monument to galactic bureaucracy gone wrong, a sprawling mess of mismatched modules bolted together over 2 centuries of temporary expansions. It squatted on the edge of civilized space like a rusty spider, catching ships that needed fuel, repairs, or a place to hide from whatever poor life choices had brought them this far out. Amara worked supply logistics, which was a fancy way of saying she moved boxes from point A to point B, and occasionally prevented idiots from storing volatile chemicals next to the heating cores. It wasn't glamorous. It paid enough to keep her fed, housed, and supplied with the cheap coffee that tasted like someone had already drunk it once. She'd made peace with that. Her quarters were in Cargo Bay 9 Alpha, a converted storage unit that the station administrator, in a fit of what Amara could only assume was spite, had declared residential space. It was small, metal, and about as cozy as a prison cell, but it was hers. She'd made it work. A narrow bed against one wall, a footlocker, a tiny desk made from repurposed shelving, and a cleaning schedule that would make a military academy look relaxed. Every morning, same routine. Wake at 0600. Shower in the communal facilities 3 corridors over. Return. Make the bed. That last part? That was religion. Hospital corners. Sheets pulled tight enough to bounce a credit chip. Pillow fluffed and positioned at exactly 90 degrees to the wall. Blanket smoothed until not a single wrinkle dared show its face. The whole process took maybe 3 minutes, but those 3 minutes set the tone for everything that followed. One thing done right. One small corner of the universe brought to order. Then she could face whatever chaos the station threw at her. She'd been doing this routine for 3 years without incident. Then came the Watchers. It started on a Monday, or what passed for Monday, in the station's arbitrary calendar system. Amara was smoothing the final corner of her blanket when she caught movement in her peripheral vision. She glanced up at the ventilation grate near the ceiling and froze. 6 crystalline eyes stared back at her. "Oh, hell no," she muttered. The eyes didn't blink. They just watched. Amara knew what lived in the station's ventilation system. Every long-term resident did. The Ralthek had claimed the upper ductwork as auxiliary den space shortly after their delegation arrived 8 months ago, and management had decided that arguing with 8-foot-tall apex predators about zoning violations was above their pay grade. The Ralthek stayed in their sections, humans stayed in theirs, and everyone pretended this was a completely normal arrangement. The Ralthek looked like what would happen if a panther, ape-eyed the scorpion, and a really angry poet had a baby. 6 limbs, crystalline eyes that could see in spectrums humans couldn't even name, retractable spines along their backs that dripped something the station medical staff refused to discuss, and a hunter's grace that made every movement look choreographed. Their young were supposedly kept in communal dens under strict supervision, learning the ancient ways of being terrifying. Apparently, supervision had some gaps. Amara finished smoothing her blanket, very aware of her audience. She fluffed her pillow one last time, gave it a pat that she absolutely did not make more dramatic for the Watcher's benefit, and stepped back to admire her handiwork. Then, because she'd clearly left her common sense in her other pants, she looked up at the grate and gave a little 2-fingered salute. The eyes vanished in a scramble of claws on metal. "Weird," Amara said to her empty room. She grabbed her work tablet and headed out, already mentally cataloging the supply requests she'd need to process. Behind her, in the ductwork, Three Ralthek cubs hung from the ventilation shaft supports and stared at each other in the dim light. "Did you see?" Nix whispered, his voice carrying the distinctive growl purr of young Ralthek. He was the largest of the three, his spines already showing the dark blue coloring that marked him as bold, possibly to the point of stupidity. "I saw," Opal replied. She was smaller, her crystalline eyes a paler shade that indicated a thoughtful nature. In Ralthek culture, this often translated to "doesn't rush into things and get everyone killed." "But I don't understand what we saw." Rothan, the smallest of the three, clicked his foreclaw against the metal shaft. "The human performed a ritual, nest maintenance, but not like our nest maintenance." "Obviously not like ours," Nix scoffed. "When have you ever seen anyone smooth their sleeping mat? You tear it apart, you scatter it. You prove you're not attached to soft things." "But she was very deliberate," Opal observed. "Every movement had purpose. The corners were folded in a specific pattern. The covering was pulled taut. The head cushion was adjusted to a precise angle." "Why?" Rothan asked the question that was bothering all of them. Silence in the ductwork. From somewhere deeper in the ventilation system, they could hear the rest of their clutchmates practicing combat roles. Den Mother Shivara would be leading morning hunting drills soon. They should return. "We should investigate further," Opal said. Nix's spines rippled in agreement. "Tomorrow. Same time." "Agreed," Rothan added. They scrambled back through the ductwork, each already thinking about what they'd witnessed. None of them noticed they'd just made a decision that would eventually involve 18 space stations, multiple governments, and a very stressed human who just wanted to make her bed in peace. The next morning, Amara went through her routine as usual. Wake, shower, return, make the bed, hospital corners, tight sheets, fluffed pillow, smooth blanket. The watchers were back. This time she counted 8 eyes. No, wait, 12. More of them. She ignored them with the practiced skill of someone who'd learned that acknowledging weird things on Obsidian Reach only encouraged more weird things. She finished her routine, grabbed her tablet, and left. The moment the door closed, chaos erupted in the ductwork. "I'll go first," Nix announced, dropping from the vent into Amara's quarters with the grace of a natural predator and the wisdom of a teenager. His siblings followed with varying degrees of success. Opal landed smoothly. Rothan bounced off the desk and sprawled across the floor. "The nest is there," Nix pointed at the bed with one foreclaw. "We replicate the ritual." They approached the bed like it might explode. In fairness, on Obsidian Reach, furniture occasionally did explode, so this wasn't entirely paranoid. "The covering must be pulled tight," Opal said, grabbing the blanket with her middle limbs and yanking. The blanket came completely off the bed and wrapped around her like a cocoon. "This is not correct." Nix tried the sheet-smoothing technique, but his retractable claws kept snagging the fabric. Within seconds, the sheet looked like it had fought a blender and lost. "The human made this appear effortless," he growled in frustration. Rothan studied the pillow. He picked it up, fluffed it experimentally, and placed it at what he thought was a 90-degree angle. It was closer to 45 degrees and resting on the floor. "This is harder than stalking practice," Nix admitted. "We need more observation," Opal said, finally extracting herself from the blanket. "And we need to understand the purpose before we can replicate the technique." They attempted to restore the bed to its original state. The result looked like a crime scene. Eventually, they gave up and fled back to the ductwork, before someone, anyone, could witness their failure. In the communal den, Den Mother Shivara noticed her 3 charges whispering in the corner instead of participating in the morning's spine-sharpening exercises. "Nix, Opal, Rothan," she called, her voice carrying the harmonic overtones that made young Ralthek instinctively stand straighter. "You will explain your distraction." The 3 cubs exchanged glances. Ralthek culture valued honesty among clutchmates, but it also valued not looking ridiculous in front of the den mother. "We are studying alternative nest maintenance techniques," Opal said carefully. Technically true. Technically not mentioning it was a human technique, which would raise approximately 1,000 additional questions. Shivara's crystalline eyes narrowed. "Alternative techniques. From other species," Rothan added, "to broaden our understanding of galactic cultures." Also, technically true. The cubs were getting good at this. "Interesting," Shivara said, in the tone that suggested she thought it was anything but interesting. "You will demonstrate these techniques at evening gathering." The cubs' spines drooped in unison. They were doomed. That evening, they gave the most awkward demonstration in Ralthek educational history, attempting to explain bed-making to an audience of apex predators who viewed organized sleeping spaces the way humans might view voluntary cage installation. The other cubs laughed. The adults looked concerned. Shivara looked thoughtful, which was somehow worse. After the gathering, she pulled the 3 aside. "You will show me this human who has captured your attention." It wasn't a question. The next morning, Amara was halfway through tucking her hospital corners when her door chimed. She ignored it. Delivery could wait 3 minutes. The door chimed again, more insistently. "Occupied," she called out, smoothing her sheet. The door opened anyway, because apparently station override codes meant privacy was a suggestion. Amara turned around and came face to face with 8 feet of apex predator standing in her doorway. Shivara had to duck to enter the quarters, her spines carefully retracted to avoid scraping the ceiling. Her 6 limbs moved with liquid precision, and her crystalline eyes took in every detail of the small space in roughly half a second. "You are Amara," Shivara said. The translator on her chest piece rendered her words in flat, accentless standard, completely failing to capture the harmonic layers of Ralthek speech. "You have been teaching my young." Amara's brain ran through several possible responses, rejected most of them as likely to get you killed, and settled on, "I have literally never spoken to your young. Yet they watch you, daily. They attempt to replicate your actions. They speak of your ritual." Shivara moved closer to the bed, examining it with the intensity of someone studying a weapons schematic. "Explain this nest maintenance procedure." "It's just making a bed," Amara said slowly. "You smooth the sheets, tuck the corners, fluff the pillow. Basic hygiene and organization." "Why?" "Why?" Amara blinked. "Because otherwise it's a mess? You will unmake it tonight when you sleep. Why waste energy on temporary order?" And there it was, the fundamental question that apparently bridged the gap between human and apex predator philosophy. Amara considered her answer carefully. She got the feeling that, "because my mom taught me," wouldn't cut it. "Starting the day with one thing done right," she said finally, "means you can handle whatever chaos comes next. It's not about the bed. It's about proving to yourself that you can take something messy and make it right. Even if it's small. Even if it's temporary." Shivara's spines rippled in a pattern Amara couldn't interpret. The silence stretched long enough to get uncomfortable. "This is not Ralthek thinking," the den mother said finally. "No," Amara agreed. "It's human thinking." "It is. Interesting." Shivara turned toward the door, then paused. My young will continue watching. I will not stop them. If they approach you directly, do not encourage foolishness. Wasn't planning on it, Amara muttered. Shivara left, ducking through the doorway and disappearing down the corridor with barely a sound. Amara stood in her quarters, staring at her perfectly made bed, and wondered what exactly she'd just signed up for. In the ductwork above, 3 cubs listened to every word and looked at each other with gleaming eyes. She said we could watch, Nyx whispered. Den Mother said not to be foolish, Opal countered. Watching isn't foolish, Rothan pointed out. Direct interaction, that might be foolish. They all considered this. How foolish? Nyx asked. Only one way to find out, Rothan replied. Opal sighed, but her spines rippled with anticipation. We'll need a plan. Above a converted cargo bay on the edge of civilized space, 3 apex predator cubs began plotting their approach to a human who just wanted to make her bed in peace. The universe, as always, had a terrible sense of humor. The direct approach happened on a Thursday. Amara was inventorying thermal regulators in storage section 12 when she heard the clicking. Rowel-Thek claws on metal decking made a very distinctive sound, like someone tapping fingernails on a table, except the fingernails were retractable and possibly venomous, and the table was your imminent doom. She turned around slowly, because sudden movements around predators were generally a bad idea. 3 Rowel-Thek cubs stood in the corridor behind her, arranged in what was probably supposed to be a non-threatening formation, but mostly looked like they were blocking her escape route. We have questions, the largest one announced. His spines were dark blue, almost purple, and currently standing at half-mast in what the cultural briefing materials called interested but not aggressive posture. Do you? Amara said flatly. About nest maintenance, the smallest one added. He was maybe 4 feet tall at the shoulder, which meant he was still approximately twice as dangerous as Amara on her best day. The medium-sized one, whose eyes were a paler crystalline shade, tilted her head in a gesture that looked bizarrely avian coming from a 6-limbed predator. We wish to understand the philosophy. Den Mother said you explained it as proving you can take something messy and make it right. Amara set down her inventory tablet very carefully. Your Den Mother has a good memory. We are Nyx, Opal, and Rothan. The large one, Nyx, said, gesturing to himself and his siblings in turn. We have been observing your technique for 6 days. We have attempted replication. Results are... He paused, clearly searching for the right word. Suboptimal. You've been trying to make beds, Amara said slowly. Yes, Opal confirmed. Rowel-Thek beds. Our sleeping mats, yes. And you want... What, exactly? Tips? The 3 cubs exchanged glances in the way kids did when they'd rehearsed this conversation, but hadn't quite figured out the ending. We wish to demonstrate our progress, Rothan said finally, and receive evaluation of our technique. We have developed a competitive framework to measure improvement. You want me to judge your bed-making competition, Amara said, just to make sure she'd heard correctly. Yes, all 3 said in unison. Amara looked at the 3 apex predator cubs standing in her storage corridor, asking her to judge their bed-making skills, and thought about her life choices. There had to be a timeline somewhere where she'd become an accountant. Nice, safe, boring accountant. That Amara was probably having a great day. This Amara sighed and said, When? The cubs' spines all perked up simultaneously. Tomorrow, Nyx said quickly. Morning gathering. The communal den. We have prepared demonstration space. Your Den Mother approved this? She said not to be foolish, Opal replied, which wasn't actually answering the question. "Right," Amara muttered. "I'm going to pretend that was a yes, because otherwise I'm complicit in whatever gets you three in trouble." "You will come?" Rothan's eyes had gone wide with what Amara was choosing to interpret as excitement rather than predatory focus. "I'll come, but I'm setting rules. Speed, neatness, and—" She paused, wondering if she'd lost her mind entirely. "Style points for creative interpretation." "Style points," Nix repeated, testing the words. "You'll understand when you see it," Amara said. "Now get out of my storage section before someone reports a predator incident, and I have to do paperwork." They left in a scrambling rush of claws and excited clicking sounds. Amara picked up her tablet and tried to return to thermal regulator inventory. She lasted about 30 seconds before pulling up her comm and messaging Pollux. "Amara, I think I just agreed to judge a Ralthek bed-making competition." Pollux. "What?" Amara. "You heard me." Pollux. "I'm going to need context." Amara. "Don't have any." Three Cubs asked. I said yes. Tomorrow morning. Pollux. "Are you having a stroke? Should I send medical?" Amara. "Just documenting this in case it becomes an incident report later." Pollux. "I hate this station." Amara. "Get in line." She closed the comm and went back to work, trying very hard not to think about what she'd just committed to. The communal den was exactly as welcoming as Amara had imagined, which was to say it looked like the kind of place where people went to get eaten. The walls were scored with claw marks that might have been decorative or might have been from actual fights. Amara wasn't sure she wanted to know which. Sleeping mats were scattered in a vaguely organized pattern around the central space, each one looking like it had been subjected to regular violence. Approximately 20 young Ralthek were gathered in a loose circle, their crystalline eyes all focused on Amara with unsettling intensity. Shivara stood near, the back, arms crossed in a configuration that probably meant something in Ralthek body language, but mostly just made her look even more intimidating. "The human arrives," Nix announced, like Amara was visiting royalty instead of a supply runner who'd made a questionable decision. "Hi," Amara said weakly. 3 sleeping mats had been arranged in the center of the space. They were currently in what Amara assumed was Ralthek standard condition, which meant they looked like they'd been attacked by a blender. "The rules," Opal said, her voice carrying surprising authority for someone who barely reached Amara's shoulder. 3 trials: speed trial, fastest completion; precision trial, neatest result; style trial, creative interpretation. The human Amara will judge. "Competitors to your positions," Rothan added. The 3 Cubs moved to their respective mats. The other young Ralthek settled into watching positions, spines rippling with anticipation. Amara caught Shivara's eye. The den mother's expression was utterly unreadable. "Right then," Amara said, committing fully to this insanity. "Speed trial. You have 2 minutes to complete basic nest. Mat maintenance, smoothed surface, tucked edges, organized sleeping position. Ready?" 3 sets of crystalline eyes locked onto her. "Go." What followed was the most chaotic 2 minutes of Amara's week, and her week had included a coolant leak in the main corridor and a fight between a Pryton merchant and a Mothlar trade delegate over parking space. Nix attacked his mat like it had personally insulted his family. Claws flew. Fabric stretched. Within 30 seconds, he had the mat flat, and the edges tucked, poorly, but tucked, and a small cushion positioned in approximately the right spot. He sat back, spines flared triumphantly. 1 minute, 15 seconds, Amara called out. Opal worked with methodical precision, each movement deliberate. She smoothed the mat in long, careful strokes, used her middle limbs to fold the edges at perfect angles, and positioned her cushion with mathematical accuracy. When she finished, her mat actually looked pretty good. 1 minute, 52 seconds, Amara announced. Rothan was doing something weird. He'd started normally enough, but then he'd grabbed some kind of bioluminescent moss. Where had he gotten that? And was weaving it along the edges of his mat in a decorative pattern, while simultaneously smoothing the center with his hind limbs and adjusting his cushion with his foreclaws. "Time!" Amara called. Rothan made one final adjustment and stepped back. His mat was a bizarre fusion of neat and creative, with glowing moss outlining the edges in a pattern that actually looked deliberately artistic. The watching cubs clicked and chittered among themselves. "Nix wins speed," Amara said, "but that mat looks like it fought back and lost. Opal, yours is precise, but you barely made time. Rothan, what exactly am I looking at?" "Creative interpretation," Rothan said. "You said style points would be awarded." "I did say that," Amara admitted. "And honestly, the moss pattern is kind of impressive. Where'd you get it?" "Hydroponics section. It's non-toxic and adhesive." "You planned this?" "Yes." Despite herself, Amara grinned. "Okay, next trial, precision. Take your time. I'm judging on neatness, symmetry, and overall presentation. No time limit. Begin." This time all three cubs slowed down, working with visible concentration. Nix kept snagging his mat with his claws and having to restart sections. Opal performed each step with deliberate care, treating it like a military drill. Rothan continued his weird fusion approach, adding technical precision to his creative touches. The other young Raltek watched in absolute silence, which Amara found more unnerving than if they'd been making noise. When all three finished, Amara walked around each mat, examining them from multiple angles. She felt ridiculous, but also weirdly invested in giving honest feedback. "Nix, you've got the enthusiasm, but you need to work on claw control. See these snags? Smooth movements. Retract the claws when you're working with fabric." "Opal, this is genuinely impressive. Hospital corners aren't perfect, but they're close. Good symmetry, clean edges." Rothan, she paused at his mat, which now had moss arranged in a spiral pattern with the cushion at the center, like some kind of nest art installation. "I don't know what this is, but I respect the commitment." "Who wins precision?" one of the watching cubs called out. "Opal," Amara said without hesitation. "Technical skill? No question." Opal's spines rippled in what might have been pleasure, or might have been, "I'm trying not to show emotion, but failing." Hard to tell. "Final trial," Amara announced. "Style. This is where you show me something I haven't seen before. Combine speed and precision however you want, but make it yours. 5-minute time limit. Show me what you've learned." The three cubs looked at each other, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Then they moved to their mats and began. Nix went for aggressive efficiency, his movements sharper and more controlled than before. He smoothed, tucked, and arranged with focused intensity, and when he finished his mat, looked military-grade basic. No frills, but clean and functional. Opal created something that looked like it could be featured in a design catalog. Perfect angles, perfectly positioned cushion, and she'd somehow found small stones to weight down the corners in precise symmetry. Rothan went completely off-script. He wove the moss into geometric patterns, arranged multiple cushions in a nested configuration, and created something that was less made bed and more artistic installation that happened to be functional sleeping space. When time was called, Amara stood back and looked at all three mats. The watching cubs had gone completely still. Shivara had moved closer, her eyes fixed on the E 3 demonstration mats with unreadable intensity. Okay, Amara said slowly. Here's my professional opinion as someone who's been making beds for 30 years. Nix, you've learned focus. That mat shows discipline and control you didn't have in the first trial. Opal, you've taken precision and made it your identity. That mat is flawless by any standard. And Rothan, she gestured at the artistic chaos of his mat, you've understood that the point isn't following rules, it's finding what works for you. That's creative problem-solving. Who wins? Nix asked, his spines at full attention. Style trial? Rothan? Overall competition? Amara paused, milking the moment. Honestly, you all win. You've learned different approaches to the same problem. That's more valuable than any single technique. The den erupted in clicking and chittering. Several of the watching cubs scrambled forward to examine the mats more closely. 2 of them immediately started arguing about whether moss patterns constituted valid decoration. Shivara approached, and the noise cut off instantly. This bed-making, the den mother said, looking at the 3 mats. You judge them to have learned valuable skills? I judge them to have learned that discipline can be interesting instead of just mandatory, Amara replied carefully. That small tasks done well build larger capabilities. That different approaches can all be valid. Shivara was quiet for a long moment. Then, show me. Show you? The human technique, properly demonstrated. I will attempt to replicate it. Every cub in the den turned to stare at their den mother. Amara got the distinct impression this was not standard den mother behavior. Amara said eloquently. Sure, I'll need a mat. One was provided immediately. Amara knelt beside it, very aware of her audience of apex predators, and began the routine she'd done thousands of times. Smooth the surface, tuck the edges, hospital corners, fold and tuck. Arrange the cushion. One final smoothing pass. Check the symmetry. Done. She stood up. That's it. Basic human bed making. Shivara moved to an empty mat. Every cub watched their den mother with wide eyes as she attempted to replicate Amara's movements. The result was, actually, not bad. The corners were sloppy, and the cushion placement was off, but the fundamentals were there. Again, Shivara said. She did it again. And again. Each iteration slightly better than the last. On the 5th attempt, she created something that would pass Amara's inspection. Shivara sat back and looked at her mat with an expression Amara couldn't quite read. There is discipline here, the den mother said finally. Control of small things. Precision in routine. This is not Ralthek tradition, but perhaps, she paused. Tradition can expand. She stood, addressing the gathered cubs. Organized nestcraft will be incorporated as optional study. Those who wish to pursue this skill may do so. Those who prefer traditional methods will continue those paths. Different strengths for different roles. The cubs erupted in excited clicking. Nix, Opal, and Rothan looked at each other with expressions of pure triumph. Amara edged toward the exit, hoping to escape before this got any weirder. Amara, Shivara called, my young will continue to seek your guidance. I trust you will not teach them foolishness. Just bed-making, Amara promised. Just bed-making, Shivara agreed, in a tone that suggested she knew exactly how insufficient that promise was. Amara fled back to her quarters, messaged Pollux that she'd survived, and collapsed onto her perfectly made bed. In the ductwork above, she could hear clicking and chittering. The cubs were arguing about technique already. She closed her eyes and tried to remember when her life had been normal. The next morning, she found a small piece of bioluminescent moss arranged in a spiral pattern on her desk. A gift? from apex predator cubs for teaching them to make their beds. Amara put her head in her hands and laughed until she cried. It was going to get so much worse before it got better. The moss incident should have been a warning. Within a week, Amara's morning routine had acquired an audience that extended well beyond 3 Ralthek cubs. The ductwork now contained representatives from at least 4 different species, all watching with varying degrees of incomprehension as she tucked her hospital corners and fluffed her pillow. On Monday morning, she spotted compound eyes reflecting light from the upper vents. Mothlar hive spawn, their segmented bodies clustered together in the characteristic collective formation they maintained even as juveniles. On Wednesday, she heard the distinctive wet slapping sound of Preton juveniles navigating the metal shafts, their amphibious bodies leaving moisture trails that maintenance was definitely going to complain about. On Thursday, the temperature in her quarters dropped 3 degrees, which meant Alcresh youth were present. Gaseous beings whose very existence made thermodynamics cry. Amara ignored them all and made her bed. Then Pollux called an emergency meeting. "Explain," he said without preamble, his office display showing surveillance footage from multiple corridors, "why I have reports of unauthorized youth gatherings in residential section 9 Alpha." "They're watching me make my bed," Amara said tiredly. Pollux stared at her. "What?" "The Ralthek cubs started it. Now other species young are interested. They watch, they learn, they go practice on their own. It's harmless." "Harmless," Pollux repeated. "There are mothlar hive spawn synchronizing their sleeping chamber arrangements in geometric patterns that are triggering the fire safety sensors because the system thinks they're building explosives. There are Praeton juveniles flooding their quarters because they're trying to calculate optimal moisture distribution for sleep surface preparation. And the Alcresh youth are," he checked his notes, "creating rest field geometry that's interfering with the station's gravitational stabilizers." "So it's educational," Amara offered. "It's a nightmare." "But they're all doing it peacefully," Amara pointed out. "Different species young, interacting without incidents. When's the last time that happened on Obsidian Reach?" Pollux opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That's not the point." "That's exactly the point. They've found common ground in something completely harmless. Bed making." "Nestcraft," Amara corrected, "the Ralthek term, more species inclusive." Pollux put his head in his hands. "I'm authorizing this as an official cultural exchange program. Minimal budget. You're responsible for supervision. If anything explodes, catches fire, or causes an interstellar incident, it's your problem." "Wait, I didn't agree to—" "Congratulations on your new assignment," Pollux said, and terminated the connection. Amara sat in her quarters and contemplated the series of poor decisions that had led to this moment. Her contemplation was interrupted by a chime at her door. She opened it to find a delegation of Ralthek elders standing in the corridor, their combined presence making the air feel noticeably thinner. "Oh no," Amara said. "We have traveled from the Ralthek homeworld," the largest elder announced, his spines showing the silver coloration of advanced age, "to investigate reports that our youth are being domesticated by human influence." "I taught them to make beds," Amara said weakly. "Show us." It was not a request. 15 minutes later, Amara was demonstrating hospital corners for a council of the galaxy's most dangerous predators, while trying very hard not to think about her mortality. She smoothed, tucked, and arranged with mechanical precision, very aware that one wrong move could result in her becoming a cautionary tale. When she finished, the elders studied her bed in complete silence. The tension was suffocating. Then Hrothgar the Ancient, easily the oldest and most decorated warrior in the group, stepped forward. "I will attempt this." Every other elder went very still. Hrothgar moved to an empty mat one of the cubs had hastily provided. His movements were stiff with age but precise with practice. He smoothed the surface with careful deliberation, folded the edges at exact angles, and positioned the cushion with mathematical accuracy. The result was flawless. He sat back and examined his work, with eyes that had seen centuries of battle, conquest, and cultural evolution. "There is honor in mastery of small things," Hrothgar said finally. "Control of one's rest space demonstrates control of one's mind. This is not weakness. This is discipline applied to daily life." He turned to Amara. "You have taught our young something valuable, human. Not bed-making. Focus." The other elders clicked their agreement, spines rippling in synchronized patterns. "We sanction this. Practice," Hrothgar announced. "Organized nestcraft will be recognized as valid developmental training for Ralthek youth. Optional, but honored." Amara managed a weak nod, still processing that she'd just received approval from Apex Predator High Command to continue teaching children to make beds. The elders departed, leaving her standing in a room full of cubs who looked at her like she'd just conquered a planet. "This is insane," she muttered. "This is amazing," Nyx corrected, his spines fully flared with excitement. "We're organizing a championship," Opal added. "Multiple species, proper competition structure, you're judging." "Of course I am," Amara said, because at this point, why not? In her quarters that night, she found her bed had been made by unknown hands, or claws, or appendages. It was a disaster of good intentions, with corners tucked at random angles and her pillow somehow on the floor. But it was earnest. She left it exactly as it was and slept on the couch. The first Intergalactic Youth Nest-Making Championship, Amara had fought the name, lost spectacularly, and given up, took place 3 weeks later in the station's main recreation hall. Pollux had authorized the event with the enthusiasm of someone signing their own execution warrant, allocated exactly 0 additional budget, and then retreated to his office with a bottle of something that probably violated station regulations. The turnout was unexpected. 12 species, 32 competitors, an audience of approximately 200 beings crammed into a space designed for half that number. Maintenance had installed temporary atmosphere processors to handle the varied respiratory requirements, and medical was on standby for environmental incompatibility incidents. Amara stood at the judges' table, a repurposed cargo container, and wondered if this was what a nervous breakdown felt like. "Competitors, to your positions," she announced through the translation system, which rendered her words in 18 different languages simultaneously, and probably offended at least 3 of them. The participants moved to their designated spaces. Each had been provided with sleeping surfaces appropriate to their species. Mats for the Ralthek, moisture-regulated platforms for the Pretons, suspended hammock structures for the Mothlar, and something the Alcresh had described as coherent rest fields that Amara was pretending to understand. Nyx, Opal, and Rothan occupied positions of honor in the Ralthek section. Over the past weeks, their techniques had evolved dramatically. Nyx had learned patience. His movements were still quick, but controlled now, precision emerging from speed rather than fighting against it. He'd developed a technique he called efficient grace that involved using all 6 limbs in coordinated sequences. Opal had discovered that perfection could be a trap. Her mats were still immaculate, but she'd started incorporating small, deliberate asymmetries, cushions slightly off-center, edges tucked at complementary, rather than identical angles. She called it intentional variation, and it made her work somehow more impressive. Rothan had become the mad artist of nestcraft. His mats were functional sculptures, incorporating materials and patterns that shouldn't work, but somehow did. Today, he'd brought crystallized mineral formations that refracted light across his sleeping surface in geometric patterns. "Rules are simple," Amara announced, reading from notes that Opal had helped prepare. "3 trials: speed, precision, and creative interpretation. Judges will evaluate based on technique, cultural authenticity, and overall presentation. This is not about being human. This is about mastering your own approach to organized rest space." That last part had been Rothkal's suggestion. The ancient warrior was in the audience, watching with crystalline eyes that missed nothing. "Begin speed trial." The hall erupted in controlled chaos. The Mothlar hive spawn moved as a collective, 6 individuals working in perfect synchronization to arrange their communal sleeping chamber. Their technique was mesmerizing, each movement flowing into the next, creating patterns that looked choreographed. The Preton juveniles applied mathematical principles to moisture distribution, their platform surfaces achieving optimal hydration levels through calculated application. One of them had brought measurement tools and was taking readings between each adjustment. The Alcresh youth shaped their rest fields through pure thought, the gaseous beings condensing and expanding in rhythmic patterns that made the air shimmer. Amara had no idea how to judge this, but it looked impressive. And the Ralthek cubs demonstrated why apex predators didn't do anything halfway. Nix completed his mat in 42 seconds, every movement deliberate. Opal finished at 1 minute 18, her surface flawless. Rothan took 2 minutes, but his mat looked like something that should be in a museum. Trial after trial, species after species demonstrated that they'd taken a simple human routine and made it their own. A young Preton named Chill achieved perfect geometric symmetry through pure calculation, his moisture levels distributed at exactly optimal ratios across every square centimeter. A Mothler collective designated as Cluster 9 created synchronized patterns so precise they appeared to pulse with unified rhythm. An Alcresh youth, who identified as luminal thought, shaped rest fields in fractal patterns that hurt to look at directly, but were undeniably beautiful. And through it all, the 3 original Ralthek cubs held their own against competitors who'd had weeks to develop their techniques. The creative interpretation trial came down to 5 finalists: Rothan, Cluster 9, Kill, Luminal Thought, and a late entry, a young Ralthek named Talus, who'd created a mat arrangement that incorporated bioluminescent moss in a pattern that actually spelled out a phrase in the ancient Ralthek hunting script. Amara consulted with the other judges, Shivara for Ralthek perspective, Pollux representing station administration, and Rothkal providing elder wisdom that mostly consisted of intimidating silence. "This is impossible," Amara muttered, looking at the 5 finalists. "They're all brilliant in completely different ways." "Then judge them on what they've learned, not what they've achieved," Rothkal said quietly. "Growth matters more than perfection." Amara stepped forward. The hall went silent. "Creative interpretation winner," she announced, "goes to Rothan for demonstrating that rules are frameworks for innovation, not barriers to creativity." Rothan's spines flared so brightly they lit up the surrounding area. Nix and Opal clicked their approval, spines rippling with genuine pride for their clutchmate. "But," Amara continued, "special recognition goes to every participant. You've taken a simple human routine and made it yours. You've found common ground across species barriers. You've turned daily discipline into art, science, and community. The audience erupted in species-specific approval sounds: clicks, chirps, harmonic resonances, and probability fluctuations. Afterward, during the informal gathering that emerged from the formal competition, Amara found herself surrounded by younglings from half a dozen species, all wanting to discuss technique and philosophy. Shivara approached, navigating through the crowd with practiced ease. "You have taught my young well, not just bed-making, discipline as joy rather than obligation." "I just wanted to make my bed in peace," Amara said. "Peace," Shivara observed, "is rarely simple, but often worth pursuing." That evening, Amara returned to her quarters exhausted and found all three Raltec cubs waiting outside her door. "We made you something," Nick said. They led her inside. Her bed had been made. Not just made, transformed. Hospital corners so precise they could pass military inspection. Sheets smoothed to impossible flatness. Pillow positioned at exactly 90 degrees. And along the edges, a border of bioluminescent moss arranged in patterns that combined all three cubs' signature styles: Nix's efficient lines, Opal's perfect symmetry, Rothan's artistic flourishes. It was a disaster in the best possible way. Six-limbed predators didn't quite grasp human furniture proportions, so the scale was off, and the moss was definitely going to be a cleaning problem later. But it was the most earnest thing Amara had ever seen. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You taught us that small things done well matter," Opal said. "We wanted to show you we learned." They left, scrambling back through the ductwork, already arguing about tomorrow's practice techniques. Amara sat on her perfectly imperfect bed and pulled up her comm. Pollux. "Status report?" Amara. "Championship complete. No incidents. Cultural exchange successful." Pollux. "I'm getting reports that nestcraft competitions have started on 3 other stations." Amara. "That's not my problem." Pollux. "You started this." Amara. "I just made my bed." She closed the comm, looked at her quarters. Moss-decorated bed, scattered evidence of interspecies cooperation, the faint sound of cubs practicing in the ductwork above, and smiled. Outside her window, Obsidian Reach continued its eternal rotation. A monument to galactic chaos held together by bureaucracy and hope. Somewhere in that chaos, younglings from a dozen species were learning that discipline could be joyful, that small tasks done well built larger capabilities, and that humans had somehow conquered the galaxy not with weapons or technology, but with the inexplicable ability to make anything, even basic tidiness, into a bonding ritual. 3 months later, competitive nest crafting had spread to 18 stations. There was talk of forming an actual league. Pollux had stopped answering Amara's messages. And every morning, Amara woke at 0600, showered in the communal facilities, returned to her quarters, and made her bed while an audience of alien younglings watched from the ductwork and took notes. One thing done right. One small corner of the universe brought to order. Then she could face whatever chaos came next. The cubs had learned well.